Hey everybody, today I wanted to talk about how we evolve as artists and looking at this painting, which is a good few months old. I was just noticing how much my style has changed just from the last few months. This painting by far is a more atmospheric painting than I usually paint, but it just got me to thinking about all the changes I've made in my artistic journey over the last 25 years or so. I remember when I was a kid, I just drew with a pencil. I was fairly good right off the bat at just looking at anything in front of me and being able to draw it fairly accurately. It was always sort of I had a natural instinct, I guess you could call it, to see something, draw it, and then compare back and forth and see where I needed to refine things until I had an accurate representation of what I was looking at. And it was always there to some degree, but not at all to where it is now. And that journey just keeps evolving. And if you're getting started with portrait painting, especially if you've been drawing your portraits for a really long time and you made the switch to doing actual paintings, there is a huge learning curve when you get to that point where you want to go from graphite or charcoal and switch over to acrylic paints or oil paints. There are a lot of things that you are going to have to learn, and it's going to be really rough for a good little while. I remember when I first switched from just black and white pencil drawing to color, the first assignment I decided to give myself was doing an abstract painting just to get familiar with the acrylic paint that I was using at the time. And I ended up doing this 2 foot by 4 foot painting that actually still hangs in my house, just to remind myself of where I started. And it was just a bunch of different subtle blues. It kind of reminded me of doing a landscape painting, but of the sky, essentially. It's just this very cloudy, lots of blues and subtle tones. I'm sure I probably should put something else up in its place, but it's not the worst painting in the world, but I've had tons of worse efforts since then. I just got lucky off the bat with that first abstract painting, and it gave me a good rough idea of how to push acrylic paint around. Now, jumping from abstract and trying to do a color portrait, now that was a much different first effort. My first portrait painting was very, very unfortunate looking. I gave it as much effort as I could, but it just was not coming together. I had no clue how to control the colors, how to control the paint. I was using acrylics at the time, so that did make it a little bit more difficult. It wasn't until I made the switch over to oil paints that I found that my real struggle was with the paint I was using. So the second I switched over to oil paint, the first thing I painted was actually a still life of some bananas and a stuffed animal. It actually turned out pretty well. For being my very first oil painting, I just knew instantly that my troubles were really with the medium, not with my ability to paint. So it might take something like this to happen for it to start clicking for you. You may find that acrylic paint works really well for your portrait painting abilities. For me, it was very difficult to paint a portrait in oil paint because I think I always wanted to be able to move the paint around. I didn't like the fact that it dried really fast. And that was my biggest concern. I did do a couple portraits that turned out okay with acrylic, but it just didn't have the feel that I was after. And I think a lot of that comes from just looking at certain artists that I really admired and wanting to paint like them. And I think that's how a lot of us end up growing as artists, as we start exploring the art that's around us. And the artists that really click for us, the ones that just, you go, oh my gosh, I want to paint like that person, that is the direction your art usually ends up going. But the best advice I think that I can give that will really help to accelerate your abilities is to not jump past your current ability to paint a portrait. If you are just getting started, you're decent at drawing with pencil, but you haven't made the jump to painting, don't really expect that this first time, the 10th time, 20th time that you try to paint a portrait with oil paint or acrylic, that it's going to go very well. I would say start with the basics. Make sure that you first get a feel for the paint, figure out how oils feel versus acrylics. But if you're still struggling just to draw a portrait, if you're still in those beginning stages where you're still just having a tough time seeing the features of a face and reproducing them without having to trace or use grids or projecting, whatever methods that you maybe try to get around the drawing process, I would say stick with pencil for now. Try to get that basic understanding of light and shadow down first. The second you start throwing color into the mix, you're going to be adding another layer of difficulty that maybe you're not prepared. So I would suggest go through, find all the tutorials you can. I have some tutorials on my Patreon account that are great for helping you as a painter. And at some point, I will definitely be doing some heavy drawing tutorials as well. It kind of depends on when you're actually watching this YouTube video. If it's 1 year old versus a day old, my Patreon account is always growing. There's always going to be more tutorials. So check that out. There may be some great tutorials for you that will get you started with understanding how to draw a portrait with paint, and a lot of other tutorials about color theory, organizing your colors, organizing your palette. A lot of foundational things will be found on my Patreon account, so check that out. But for now, I would say, depending on where you're at, just understand where you're at as an artist and what you need. Because if you don't have those foundational things, if you're not building from the foundation up and you're trying to skip some steps, you may be missing out on a lot of fundamental things that will help you in your pursuit to become a really great portrait artist. So my journey led me to this point after doing a lot of foundational things, learning how to mix paint, learning how to create any color on my palette, and then just building on those skills slowly over years, day by day. You got to take it one step at a time. This is where my art is now, creating these expressive portrait paintings that are partially abstract and partially impressionistic. And I love the direction my work has gone. It speaks to me, and that's what you need to do, is find the kind of artwork that speaks to you, because if it speaks to you, that means it's telling your story, and that is what people will connect with when they are looking at your work. They will see that your work has grown. They'll see those little changes that you've made, how your work has evolved, and they'll start following you for those reasons. Seeing how your work is changing is part of the fun for somebody that invests their time in watching your journey happen in front of them. And after a while, they will see that journey come to a place where they really want to purchase your work. It may take years, but as long as you put in the time, people will see that you have taken the initiative to grow and become a great artist. And you really can't fake that. You can't just pop up one day on the internet and start showing your work and say, buy my work. They want to see the growth. They want to see how you started, your humble beginnings, and then see you blossom into an amazing artist. So that's, I guess the way I look at it when it comes to where your journey should lead you as an artist. But definitely know that your journey is going to be unique. So keep that in mind when you're painting. Don't get too frustrated, and know that it's just going to take some time and some effort, just like all things in life. So thank you again for tuning in to another one of my YouTube videos. I'll see you again next week.